It's May 1st, 1994, a day that dawns with clear skies and high hopes for the Formula One community. The sun-soaked San Marino Grand Prix at Imola, the third race of the 1994 season, promises a spectacle. But as history would have it, this race would become known not for the thrill of victory, but as the darkest weekend in Formula One's history, what many would come to call the Black Weekend. Heading into the race, Michael Schumacher had already established dominance, winning the first 2 rounds of the championship for Benetton. But for Ayrton Senna, it was a season of frustration. The 3-time world champion, who had moved to Williams in pursuit of a 4th title, had yet to score a single point. "Our championship starts here," Senna declared, as if speaking a premonition. The pressure was mounting, both on and off the track. Senna's move to Williams was supposed to be the beginning of a new era, yet it felt more like an uphill battle. Williams had dominated the previous seasons with their active suspension system, but with its banning in 1994, the car suddenly became unstable and difficult to handle. The once invincible Senna was now wrestling with a machine that lacked the precision he was used to, while Schumacher thrived under the new regulations. The qualifying session was tense. Senna, known for his unmatched skill in pushing a car to its limits, felt the weight of expectation as he sought the pole position. But disaster struck early. A young rookie, Rubens Barrichello, whom Senna had mentored since his karting days, suffered a horrifying crash at 225 km/h. The scene was chaotic as Barrichello's car flipped and slammed into the barriers, leaving him unconscious. Emergency crews acted swiftly, reviving him after he had swallowed his tongue. Senna, shaken and deeply concerned, rushed to his side in the medical center. Barrichello was lucky, escaping with only minor injuries, but the incident was a sobering reminder of the ever-present danger in Formula One. Barrichello's accident was not just a scare, it foreshadowed the tragic events that were to follow. For Senna, this wasn't just the concern of a mentor, it was a sign that something was deeply wrong with the cars in 1994.
Como eu já disse antes, de imediato são pouco mais instáveis, com a retirada da suspensão eletrônica, e pouco mais difíceis, então, com consequência de pilotar. Talvez tenha mais carros rodando, saindo da pista.
The emotional toll on Senna was visible as he grappled with the reality of how vulnerable even the most skilled drivers could be. Senna managed to secure pole position, a small victory amid the unfolding tragedy. Yet, he couldn't shake the unease that had settled over the paddock. Formula One was in a state of flux. The FIA had introduced new regulations for 1994 aimed at reducing the car's technological sophistication to improve the spectacle. Electronic aids like active suspension and traction control were banned. Senna had been vocal in his concerns, predicting that these changes would lead to more accidents. Perhaps he was all too aware of the ticking clock. The 1994 rule changes were not merely a shift in technology. They represented a philosophical debate about the direction of the sport. As driver aids were stripped away, the onus fell squarely on the drivers to control machines that had become increasingly unstable, and Senna feared this instability would lead to disaster. His warnings were not just predictions, they were rooted in his deep understanding of how these changes altered the balance between speed and safety. Then came Saturday, April 30th, the day that claimed the life of Roland Ratzenberger. It was only Ratzenberger's second Formula One race. Desperate to out-qualify his teammate, he pushed his Simtek to the limit. At 314 km/h, a damaged front wing tore loose, sending him head-on into the concrete wall at the Villeneuve corner. The impact was devastating. The sight of the lifeless Austrian in the wreckage cast a pall over the entire paddock. Senna, heartbroken and furious, drove to the scene himself in a safety car, determined to understand what had happened. At least someone cared about safety, he snapped back at those who criticized his actions. But the truth was grim. Ratzenberger had died instantly. However, under Italian law, the race organizers delayed the official announcement of his death to avoid halting the event, prioritizing financial interests over human life. Ratzenberger's crash highlighted the cruel reality of Formula One's dangers, a sport where dreams often collided with tragedy. For Senna, the loss was deeply personal. It was not just the death of a fellow driver, but a reflection of the vulnerability every driver faced. The fact that financial concerns overrode the immediate acknowledgement of Ratzenberger's death underscored the harsh commercial realities of the sport. That evening, Senna's close friend, Dr. Sid Watkins, head of Formula One's medical team, urged him to walk away from the sport. "You've won the championship so many times," Watkins said. "Why don't we both quit and go fishing?" Senna's response was telling. After a long pause, he replied, "Sid, I have to go on." Despite the grief and foreboding that hung over him, Senna chose to race. This conversation was more than a simple exchange. It was a moment of reckoning for Senna, a man who found himself torn between the sport that defined him and the ominous sense that he was racing against fate. Watkins, having seen the toll the weekend was taking on Senna, was offering an escape, a way out before it was too late. But for Senna, racing was not just a profession, it was his purpose, and walking away wasn't an option. Sunday, May 1st, dawned with a tense atmosphere. The drivers gathered for a somber briefing, observing a minute's silence in memory of Ratzenberger. Senna, ever the leader, pushed for the revival of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, advocating for improved safety measures, a mission tragically cut short by what was to come. The drivers' briefing that morning was unlike any before it. Gone was the usual pre-race banter, replaced instead with hushed conversations about safety. For years, the Grand Prix Drivers Association had been dormant, but in that moment, Senna was determined to bring it back. He knew that the sport's future depended on the drivers taking a stand for their own safety, but tragically, time was not on his side. As the race began, Senna carried the Austrian flag in his cockpit, intending to honor Ratzenberger if he won, but just seconds into the race, chaos erupted. JJ Leto's stalled Benetton caused a pileup when Pedro Lamy crashed into it at full speed. Debris flew into the crowd, injuring several spectators. The safety car was deployed, a rarity for a dry track at the time. Senna, leading the race, gestured for it to speed up, fearing his tires were losing temperature, an issue that would prove catastrophic. The start of the race was chaotic and set the tone for what would follow. The deployment of the safety car so early in the race was unusual and heightened the already tense atmosphere. The safety car, a basic road car not optimized for maintaining racing speeds, forced the F1 cars to slow significantly. As the laps ticked by, Senna grew increasingly frustrated. He knew the reduced speed was causing his tire temperatures to plummet, setting up a dangerous situation. On lap 7, with the safety car gone, Senna and Schumacher resumed their battle, but at the high-speed Tamburello corner, something went horribly wrong. Senna's Williams veered off the track at 307 km per h, crashing violently into the concrete wall. The impact was devastating. Although he managed to reduce his speed to 211 km per h before impact, the forces involved were fatal. A piece of the car's suspension pierced his helmet, causing fatal head injuries. The scene was chaotic, as medics desperately tried to save the Brazilian driver, but it was clear to those who witnessed it, Formula One had just lost its greatest star. Tamburello had long been one of the most feared corners in Formula One. The lack of runoff and the presence of a solid concrete wall meant that any mistake at such high speeds could have dire consequences. In Senna's case, whether it was a mechanical failure, a problem with the steering column, or the loss of tire grip due to cooling, the outcome was tragically inevitable. The suspension arm that penetrated Senna's helmet was a cruel twist of fate, a small component yet deadly in its impact. As medics worked frantically, the paddock fell silent. Everyone knew the gravity of what had just happened. Adding to the tragedy was a surreal twist. Eric Comas, whose life Senna had saved 2 years earlier by halting a race to assist him, unknowingly sped to the scene, hoping to return the favor. But it was too late. Comas had been saved by Senna's quick thinking during the 1992 Belgian Grand Prix, when Senna risked his own safety to provide first aid. Now, fate brought Comas back to the scene, unaware that his hero was beyond saving. It was a poignant reminder of how interconnected the lives of drivers are in this small, high-stakes world. Senna was airlifted to Bologna's Maggiore Hospital, but hope had already faded. As the race dragged on, uninterrupted for the sake of TV rights and sponsorships, news began to trickle out. There would be no champagne on the podium. The world soon learned what it had lost. Senna was gone, and with him, a part of Formula One's soul. The decision to continue the race in the face of such a catastrophe was a stark reminder of the commercial pressures that often overshadow human considerations in Formula One. For the spectators and fans around the world, it felt like a betrayal, a hollow continuation of a race that no longer mattered. As news of Senna's death spread, the racing world was plunged into mourning. A sport that had celebrated speed and bravery was suddenly confronted with the cost of those very qualities. In the aftermath, the remains of both Senna's and Ratzenberger's cars were seized by Italian authorities. The investigations began, leading to sweeping changes in the sport. But for Brazil, the grief was immediate and overwhelming. 3 days of national mourning were declared. The nation had lost not just a driver, but a hero, someone who embodied their hopes and dreams. For Brazil, Senna was more than just a sportsman. He was a symbol of national pride and resilience. His humble beginnings, his dedication, and his unwavering faith made him a beloved figure far beyond the world of motorsport. The scenes in Sao Paulo, where millions lined the streets for his funeral procession, were a powerful testament to the impact he had both on and off the track. For Formula One, Senna's death was a watershed moment. It spurred a complete overhaul in safety regulations, from track design to car construction. The Grand Prix Drivers Association was reinstated, and its influence has shaped the sport ever since. Yet, the shadow of Imola still lingers, a stark reminder of the cost of progress. In the weeks following the tragedy, the FIA moved swiftly to implement changes that would revolutionize safety in the sport. Crash structures were redesigned, barriers were improved, and mandatory cockpit protection was introduced. The revival of the Grand Prix Drivers Association gave the drivers a unified voice, and their demands for better safety standards became non-negotiable. The legacy of Senna's death was a safer sport, but it also served as a haunting reminder of the risks that can never be fully eliminated. As the rest of the 1994 season played out under a dark cloud, Formula One was forever changed. The tragic loss of Ayrton Senna was more than just the end of a career. It marked the beginning of a new era, one in which the price of victory would never again be weighed against the value of a life. The remainder of the 1994 season was a constant battle between the desire to compete and the lingering grief that hung over every race. The championship fight between Schumacher and Hill became secondary to the wider conversation about safety and the future of the sport. The loss of Senna marked the end of an era defined by raw speed and unyielding bravery, giving rise to a new chapter where the emphasis on safety would redefine the sport's ethos. But even as changes were implemented, the shadow of Imola continued to loom, a reminder of how close the sport had come to losing everything. If you found this deep dive into one of Formula One's most pivotal moments insightful, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more in-depth stories from the history of this incredible sport.